A cholera outbreak kills at least 175 in Nigerian displaced peoples camps in Borno State. In East Africa, traditional fishermen and fish shops struggle on the Kenyan coast. And a new report sounds the alarm on an impending worldwide insulin shortage. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin our broadcast tonight in West Africa, where a humanitarian group working in northern Nigeria says it has recorded 10,000 cases of cholera and that at least 175 people have died from the bacterial disease that causes severe diarrhea and dehydration since the start of November. The Norwegian Refugee Council says most cases of the disease, usually spread through unsafe water, were found in camps for displaced people in Borno State, where thousands seek refuge from Boko Haram attacks. Timothy Obiezu reports from Maiduguri.
Closely built temporary sheds are the rule in this overcrowded camp in Maiduguri, where Yabusam Adam has lived with her family for 2 years. Recently, she lost her daughter to a deadly cholera outbreak here.
My daughter and I came to the camp, but she died from cholera. And we have been with my neighbors, but one of them was affected by the disease too. My 9 children and I stay here.
Congestion is a major trigger for the spread of cholera. This camp does not have enough facilities to serve the growing number of displaced people, creating a fertile environment for the disease to thrive, says one of the managers at the camp, Chima Onwe.
We have a lot of people living in just a few spaces, and these people have no limited access to basic services, mostly water, sanitation and hygiene services, like latrines. So we have a case where people are congesting latrine, situation where latrines are congested and not usable, and the only option available for this large number of people is to defecate in the open.
It was not originally their wish to be crammed together here. Most of the displaced people here fled a Boko Haram onslaught on their homes to seek refuge. Children are more at risk from the disease. Once infected, they come down with acute diarrhea. This year, Nigeria battled its deadliest cholera outbreak, killing 434 people out of nearly 40,000 cases across 18 states. The head of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, Chikwe Ihekwazu, says cholera may have been underestimated in Nigeria.
I think we've gotten to a situation in Nigeria where we've almost normalized cholera. We don't get upset about it enough. This is why here at the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, we've really mounted a vigorous risk communication effort this year to make sure that every Nigerian understands the scale of the problem.
Cholera is a waterborne disease and peaks during the rainy season. The disease in northern Nigeria became deadlier since 2009, when Boko Haram displaced about 3.3 million people. And here in Maiduguri, the birthplace of Boko Haram, there are 243,000 people living in overcrowded camps with poor hygiene facilities. And unless more land is provided to expand the camps, Nigeria could be headed toward another massive outbreak next year. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Maiduguri, Nigeria.
The United States Embassy in the Democratic Republic of Congo will remain closed through Tuesday for the second straight day because of what it says is credible and specific information about a terror threat. But the Congolese government is accusing the United States of creating needless fear and uncertainty by closing the embassy. Congo also says Washington and others who have no control over the electoral process are trying to distract voters ahead of the December 23rd presidential election. The DRC has been trying for 2 years to hold an election to replace longtime President Joseph Kabila. But violence, armed militias and problems organizing a new vote have led to 2 postponements. President Kabila was supposed to have stepped down in 2016 when his second term ended, but he invoked a clause in the Constitution allowing him to stay in office until a successor is chosen. Where marine fisheries are one of the few economic activities present everywhere along the Kenyan coast, mostly using artisanal fishing methods in which non-motorized boats stay close to the shore. In the coastal town of Malindi, thousands of households that depend on the fisheries resources face uncertainty over the sustainability of the industry. Raila Mbur has more from Malindi.
70-year-old Yusuf Abdurazak started out as a fisherman in Malindi when he was young. Then, in 1978, he set up his own shop where, supplied by local fishermen, he would sell 500 to 1,000 kilograms of fish every day. He says in the last 2 decades, the daily catches have declined significantly. He now sells 100 to 150 kilograms per day.
We used to have a lot of fish here long before, but now the fish have declined. And the locals are the most people who suffer because they haven't changed their equipment. They're using the same old ones, which they've been left by their old people.
Yusuf is one of the many locals who rely on local fishermen not only to supply their shops, but also for food. Katama Mwaringa is a third-generation fisherman from Mijikenda, one of the oldest fishing villages in Malindi. His family moved there in 1903. He says their trade, passed on from generation to generation, is under threats.
We
would catch fish, but things have gotten harder as the years go by. All we need is modern equipment or digital equipment that can help us get water from the deep seas so that we can succeed in our craft.
Mwaringa, like most locals, is too poor to own a boat. He uses a fishing net that is over 10 years old. The declining catches have resulted in low incomes and other economic difficulties for his community. Competition from prawn trawlers is also blamed for destroying the fishing ground, as they are accused of unintentionally catching and then discarding large numbers of fish that are not the species the commercial boats are after. Reliance on non-motorized fishing vessels and gear that cannot fish in deeper waters limits the quantity of fish that the traditional fishermen catch. Villagers from the Mijikenda village have come together and formed the Mijikenda Fishermen Association. 5% of each family's earnings is put in a collective fund that goes towards buying new fishing nets for the community to use. With the help of local NGOs, they have been able to fix solar panels in their village and buy a communal freezer to store fish. Professor Ntiba Misheni is Kenya's Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Fisheries Development. He says there are plans by the government to empower small-scale fishermen on the Kenyan coast to improve livelihoods.
The government is going to establish a Kenya fishing school because if you are not trained to become a fisher, then we always find you at the shore and in near high water. And this is why the near shore waters, the artisanal areas where many of the people concentrate their fishing are overfished. So we need to train and also build capacity for Kenyans to be able to venture into deeper waters.
Kenya is hosting the first ever Sustainable Blue Economy Conference. Over 4,000 participants from around the world are coming together to learn how to harness the potential of the oceans, seas, lakes and rivers to improve the lives of those who rely on those waters for food and income. For the artisanal fishermen in Malindi, it remains a struggle to survive. Raila Mbur for VOA News in Malindi.
Well, a species of giraffe facing the threat of extinction could be helped by using drones to track their movements across Africa and catch poachers. Sam Holder reports.
This species of giraffe is facing extinction. Filmed here in Cameroon, experts say there are just 2,000 Kordofan giraffes left in Africa. But footage just like this could actually be key in trying to save them.
One of our priorities at the moment is just understanding how many are there and how are they using their environment. The other thing we're doing is using drones to be able to see how they're moving within the area. That's used for wildlife monitoring, but it's also used by the eco guards who are patrolling to try to deter illegal activities.
Conservation groups across the world are developing specialised drones with infrared cameras, allowing data to be recorded from across huge areas of land that would normally be impossible at ground level. Something necessary to keep track of giraffes.
Because they're across these different countries, they have this wide range, but that means small pockets of individuals really widely dispersed, and that limits genetic health of the population, and then once you have that problem, it leads to all kinds of reproductive issues.
Other problems include herders allowing cattle to eat food that giraffes depend on, illegal hunting, and the destruction of their habitat. The Kordofan giraffe has now been labelled critically endangered, but the problems aren't isolated. In total, across all species, there are under 100,000 giraffes left in the wild.
Well, Sam Holder of Reuters with that report. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, grim predictions about the worldwide insulin supply. But first, a look at Tuesday's headlines.
The fundamental issue is that this nation is broken.
Become involved in conservation, real meaningful conservation.
Dépasserons, nous atteindrons carrément les 60% de l'électorat.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with a report on gender-based violence. Lino.
The annual 16-day campaign of activism against gender-based violence was launched Sunday in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Global in scope, the campaign seeks to raise awareness on the need to end violence against women and girls, and is led by the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, with participation from the entire UN family, national governments, civil society, and the private sector. Observers say persisting conflict and humanitarian disaster are worsening already these small indicators for women's empowerment and gender equality. Out of the 4.2 million people needing humanitarian assistance in Somalia, about 50% are women and girls. Humanitarian actors estimate that 2.6 million are internally displaced in Somalia, and women and girls living in displaced communities are more vulnerable to gender-based violence than those living in stable communities. The launch of the campaign coincided with the observance of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women.
When we consider the fact that we have high maternal mortality rates, could that be linked to child marriage? Could that be linked to issues of complications of FGM? It is time to critically look at some of those things that put women and girls at a disadvantage. As UN Women, we want to say we stand with Somali, we stand with the women of Somalia, we stand with the women of Africa, and we stand with women globally to end violence against women. It's a scourge that cuts across culture, it cuts across economic status, social status. Is a global phenomenon. And unless there's a global coalition to end violence against women and girls, it will never end.
And the annual 16-day campaign of activism against gender-based violence ends on December 10th, when International Human Rights Day is commemorated. Now, after years of decline, annual rates of malaria, the mosquito-borne disease, have leveled off, according to the World Health Organization's 2018 report. The report says the only solution is to focus on the countries hit hardest by the disease, most of which are in Africa. Although scientists are working on vaccines and ways to control mosquito numbers, preventative measures aren't working fast enough. The estimated number of malaria cases worldwide fell from nearly 240 million in 2010 to just over 214 million in 2015, but then rose by 5 million to 219 million in 2017. There is some good news, however. Countries with fewer than 10,000 cases of malaria are now within reach of eliminating the disease completely. India recorded a 24% reduction in malaria cases in 2017, and Rwanda saw a 436,000 case drop. The WHO's malaria chief, Pedro Alonso, says methods of combating malaria need fine-tuning.
The question to us is how do we get back on track to meet those targets, and this is what WHO, in collaboration with partners across the world, is launching a response that we have called From High Burden to High Impact, putting the focus on the highest burden countries, helping them get back on track by the 4 key elements: political leadership, the use of all information to better target the response, improving our normative work, and most importantly, coordinating all partners around a national plan, a nationally owned and developed plan.
Experts say the World Health Organization needs to get back on track quickly if it is to meet its target of reducing malaria disease and mortality rates by 40% by 2020. A newly released report on diabetes is warning of a future worldwide shortage of insulin because of the increasing number of people who are developing type 2 diabetes and require the hormone to stay healthy and alive. Here is VOA's Faith Lapidus with the details.
Haroon Abdallah is one of the world's more than 400 million adults with type 2 diabetes.
When I was diagnosed with diabetes, I started feeling my life is finished.
Abdallah lives in Kibera, the biggest slum in Africa. He lost his job when he was diagnosed in 2006 and can barely afford to buy insulin, let alone the diet his doctor has advised him to follow.
Nowadays, I don't have value in this world.
Almost no one in Kibera can afford drugs. The government has set up a health facility which subsidizes the cost of diabetes medicine. But the patient load here is growing. The biggest factors for developing type 2 diabetes are obesity and lifestyle.
We tend to be inactive, lack of exercises, and our diets. I will say the community we serve here in Kibera, most likely it's our diet, which are not good. So which could predispose one to having diabetes.
The number of adults with type 2 diabetes worldwide is expected to grow to 511 million by 2030, according to a new study in the Lancet Medical Journal. It's the people here in sub-Saharan Africa who will have the greatest trouble getting access to insulin, says the study's lead author, Dr. Sanjay Basu.
Certainly in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, we're finding the biggest shortages, as you might expect. What's perverse is that even though you would expect less people with type 2 diabetes, because those food environments are changing and the overall lifestyles are changing around the world, we're actually seeing a rapid increase in type 2 diabetes in both Africa and Asia at the same time as we're seeing lower insulin levels, so that can produce a perverse scenario.
3 pharmaceutical companies produce 96% of the world's insulin, and it's not known whether they can increase production to meet additional demand in the future. Basu admits the alarming shortages he's predicting might not materialize. Although the study is based on data from about 60% of everyone with type 2 diabetes worldwide, the researchers haven't factored in demographic changes in African countries. Also, changes in diet and exercise regimens could result in a far smaller need for insulin. Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks and good to see you back, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. U.S. President Donald Trump is defending his administration's use of tear gas to stop a group of Central American migrants who try to force their way into the United States. The unrest presented a serious escalation of the crisis, with authorities on both sides of the border arresting migrants and pledging to prosecute those engaging in violence. VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has more.
Chaos this weekend after U.S. border agents fired tear gas to stop hundreds of migrants, among them children, as they tried to cross the border from Tijuana, Mexico. U.S. officials said members of the migrant caravan threw projectiles at border agents. President Donald Trump, who has sent thousands of troops to support border security operations, also defended the use of tear gas.
They had to use because they were being rushed by some very tough people, and they used tear gas. And here's the bottom line: nobody's coming into our country unless they come in legally.
Tijuana police have arrested dozens of migrants attempting to cross the border illegally. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection said they have arrested 69 people. Erlin Juarez is among the thousands of migrants trying to escape poverty in Honduras, now stranded in Tijuana.
We have to use force to pressure Trump into letting us in. It's a lie that they will fix the paperwork process because there are too many of us.
Human rights groups are accusing Trump of manufacturing the migrant crisis by effectively shutting down the asylum program. Melissa Crow is from the Southern Poverty Law Center.
By using tear gas, the Trump administration is preventing people from even approaching the border between ports of entry. And the reason they're doing this, and the reason they've done it for quite a long time now, is, as I said, that they are not being allowed to present and seek asylum at official ports of entry.
On Monday, Trump again said he will close the U.S.-Mexico border, which stretches over 3,000 kilometers. He has threatened to shut down the federal government unless Congress funds his proposed border wall. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
With unparalleled views of the Statue of Liberty in Manhattan, a new 26,000-square-foot museum celebrating the statue's legacy is set to open in 2019. VOA's Ramon Taylor takes a peek into the building that is still under construction and pays homage to the universal concept of liberty and Lady Liberty's more than 4 million annual visitors.
The Statue of Liberty as it now stands at the gateway to the New World.
Over a span of 62 years, from 1892 until 1954, the colossal gift from France called the Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World greeted more than 12 million immigrants who had disembarked on nearby Ellis Island. Now, a new museum to honor Lady Liberty's legacy is on the way, and the task feels, well, monumental.
When we first came on the island, we were moved. We literally saw people on their knees crying because of what this place meant. And it kind of sunk into us that this is a really special, sacred place.
4.5 million tourists visit the Statue of Liberty every year, but limited by capacity, only a fifth of that number are able to enter the monument. With the opening of the new museum and garden pavilion, everyone who visits Liberty Island is invited to explore. Through experienced design, its creators envision an open-ended dialogue.
We wanted to really convey this idea that it is our ability, all of our ability, to preserve and kind of protect the idea of liberty.
Each visitor today comes away with a different interpretation.
It represents the efforts of everyone that arrived to this country to fight for equality and fraternity.
To feel free, but always respecting the liberty of others.
Following a virtual fly-through to the tip of the statue's 93-meter-high torch, museum guests step inside the studio of statue sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi before a grand finale in the Inspiration Gallery. There, visitors view up close the original 1,600-kilo torch that stood atop the statue for nearly a century. It was replaced in the 1980s. Atop the structure itself, there are panoramic views of New York's lower Manhattan skyline. The museum's lead architecture designer calls the building and landscape piece optimistic.
It doesn't try to be nostalgic. It tries to be forward-looking. It tries to be inspirational unto itself as its own object, its own kind of new icon, while being respectful to the buildings that are here.
The Statue of Liberty Museum is expected to open in May 2019. Ramon Taylor, VOA News, New York.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Robots may be old news in Japan, but the ones in this Tokyo cafe are an unusual breed. They're not powered by artificial intelligence, but by people who have trouble working in public spaces. Nozomi Murata has been in a wheelchair since she gradually lost strength in her muscles. She previously worked in the service industry and enjoyed talking to customers, a skill noticed by the robot's designers at Ori Lab, who prefer human emotion in robots over artificial intelligence. The workers are paid around $9 an hour for operating the robots, taking orders and conversing with customers. And that's what's trending today. Well, now, after over 100 years of housing most of Egypt's ancient antiquities, the Egyptian Museum is about to be replaced by a bigger museum. But officials say the landmark site will not lose its prestige. The country is celebrating 116 years of the museum in Cairo as it prepares for the opening of a new one. We get more in this report by Channels TV in Nigeria.
Bright lights illuminate the Egyptian Museum in Cairo's Tahrir Square at the celebration of 116 years of its existence as one of the country's main tourist attractions. It's been the country's main location of Egyptian antiquities for over a century. But a bigger museum, the Grand Egyptian Museum, is under construction. As soon as the doors of the new museum open next year, antiquities will be moved. But officials insist the old facility will not become obsolete.
As you know, that Egypt now is progressing, the work is progressing very well in the Grand Egyptian Museum of the Pyramids and the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in the Fustat area. So all Cairo museum lovers were really afraid that this museum will die. Our ceremony this evening is to tell the world that this museum will never die. And we worked on this gallery, and you see it's a revival of the project.
Egyptian authorities say the old museum will remain relevant, as it will be used to display recent discoveries as well as antiquities from overpacked galleries and storerooms.
There's the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, a museum of civilization, and the Grand Egyptian Museum, Islamic museums, Coptic museums, and ancient sites. These make up new methods of attracting people. So we are saying that the Egyptian Museum will not die.
Highlights of the evening are exhibitions of ancient Egyptian antiquities, including a 20-meter-long papyrus said to be the longest on display in the country. With the new Grand Egyptian Museum, Cairo hopes to boost its tourism industry that suffered from the turmoil that followed a 2011 uprising.
Well, thanks to Channels TV in Nigeria for that report, and that's our show. Thanks. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Woodwork is any part of a house or building that is made of wood.
Crawl out of the woodwork.
This expression sounds troubling.
I won! I have the winning lottery ticket.
Oh, that's great. How much money did you win?
I won $25,000. But please, don't tell anyone.